All right, well, I guess I should just introduce you because you are, in my personal opinion, like one of the best mappers working today. You've got
Oh,
such a really solid selection of maps out, and your focus on the
appreciate that.
Walking Dead and having that as a through line with your history is like really,
Mhm.
it's really cool and unique to see. Uh, you are literally one of the people who inspired me to get into mapping. So without further ado, this is ItsBrodes.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks for the kind words. It's always nice to hear that you're inspiring other people because I grew up sort of watching custom zombies back in the World of War days, and it took several years for me to actually get the courage to dive into the tools. And I saw people like Mad Gaz and things like that. And I guess at one point in time, I was in your position where I was very envious of the abilities that these people were able to put maps together and things like that. So, the fact that I'm to some degree an inspiration for you, it's nice to hear.
Oh no, you are definitely like one of the bigger inspirations, especially with your map Interment. That was
Hmm.
a giant inspiration for me, just in the style of how I worked with an Evil Dead, trying to get like this dilapidated area to feel alive,
Hmm.
which I thought you did amazing in. I want to ask, what kind of brought you into the mod tools? Did you have any like previous ambitions with game development or game design?
No, not really. So when I was in high school, so this is talking maybe like 10 plus years ago, easily. I can't remember the exact grade I was in, but I remember talking to some friends and talking about potentially making like our school as a zombies map.
Hmm.
And I don't know if Black Ops 3 was out at this time because I remember watching a lot of NGT zombies and the custom maps and things like that. And at that point in time, I had a few friends across different grades who were in the same boat, and they basically, like, we used to play COD together and whatnot. And I guess we just got to chatting about it. And I do remember downloading World at War, and I think the tools for it at that point in time, but I just never dove into it. I always encourage to sort of give it a go because an idea is only it's always going to be best when you're the one developing it because you're the mind behind it.
Oh, for sure.
Um, but yeah, I'd actually attempted internment back in like 2017 when I first started the tools, and I actually made the map maybe like 4 or 5 times before the release that you see on the workshop came out. So yeah, a lot of practice went into making that map. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Did you have like any experience with tools before? Are you like self-taught? Did you get help from like YouTube tutorials, or was it mainly through like asking in discords?
Definitely no prior experience or knowledge on it. So everything that I had sort of learned came from the tutorials on YouTube mostly. So I think at that point in time, it was like your Uptown Papi, your Mad Gaz, Jaybird, things like that. Program 115, I
Oh
think, was
yeah,
doing stuff
all
back
the
then too.
classics.
All the classics, yeah, all the OGs. So back when I first started out, it was purely that. And I remember my first attempt, I didn't even know about scale. So like I literally just started drawing brushes and
Hmm.
stuff like that, and I jumped into the map and it was like twice my size. Um, but yeah, it was all through YouTube, and it was all through essentially the Discord. So it took me a little bit of time to, I guess, be confident enough to sort of ask questions in Discord because it was pretty cutthroat back then. It's definitely not as much these days. Like it's very much more fluid, and everyone's willing to engage and things like that and help out, which is really nice. But yeah, no prior experience. So I'm quite proud of sort of how far I've come and sort of where I am, but I'm still always learning. You as a mapper, I'm sure you're the same. Like there's always little tidbits that you learn here and there, and you go back and you're like, oh, I wish I did that in a previous
Oh yeah,
project,
exactly.
sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I always find like a small little bit of information, and then I'm like, oh, this is like the most useful thing I've ever known. Why isn't this more public? Like I remember watching a Zella
Mm.
stream, and he was like painting on a volume decal how you would like a terrain patch. I was all like, what the
Yeah,
fuck? I
right.
was like, you can do that? It's like, wait a minute, that's
Uh,
crazy.
that's news to me. I didn't know you could do
Oh,
that, but
I'll show
I,
you how to
I
do it after the stream. It's like one of the most useful
yeah,
things I've ever found out.
I'd definitely say, like, as well, the fact that you go back and you watch like Zilla's streams, and I think you've mentioned in the past that you know, that you watch through Verco and things like that. Like any developer or level design artist within the Black Ops community, or the Black Ops custom community, you, as far as I know, you're going and watching through those streams where you can. So you are obviously learning quite a bit in comparison to me, who I'm just sort of like, I'm just trialing and error things, and like I'll test things that people throw out in the chats and whatnot.
Mhm.
So my style of like mapping and the way that I do things is definitely very, not abnormal, but it's probably not like the correct way to go about doing things.
Well, I don't think there's a correct or incorrect way to go about doing things. Like my perspective is I like to learn more through others. I feel like
Yeah.
that's the best way I can gain information. So I love watching like development streams anytime I can, because seeing people who I look up to and seeing their thought processes and how they go through maps, like
Mm.
I find that very uh educational, and just seeing like little things of like, oh, this is how I do it, this is how this person does it, let's see if I can apply that person's technique to what I'm doing, and does that make a difference, and does that help out in any way. And
Yeah.
even maps that you've made, like not watching through streams but just playing them and seeing how you lay stuff out, I find that very helpful in putting into my work. Are there any like mappers yourself that you'll go into like a custom map or a official Treyarch map, and you see things and you kind of click with it and you see how it's done, and you can apply that to a map that you're making at the time?
Probably not so much in customs, only because I'm only just getting into customs in terms of like playing other people's maps, as you know.
Mhm.
So playing through other people's maps, it's like a first for me. So there's only been very select few in the past where I've done it, and that's more been purely out of, I guess, either my enjoyment or passion towards the source material. So like a good example of that is Logical's Dunder Mifflin map. So like that was one of the first custom maps I ever actually played, and that was purely just because like I'm so familiar with the source material, and
Oh,
I
really?
love The Office, right? But with respect to your question, not so much in customs, but absolutely in official COD games. So whether it's multiplayer or zombies, because I'll go in and I'll see, you know, it might be like a decal or it might be like brushwork or whatever, and I'll see that, and it's sort of interesting or weird to go into playing a map or playing a game where you sort of have a really quite good understanding on how they actually achieved it, but then there'll be other things, and I'll look at it and be like, oh, I wonder if that's a model, or if that's like, if that's made from brushes or textures because of the way that it looks. And so I'll go and try and replicate that to some degree in you know what I'm doing. It really just sort of depends on whether or not what I'm referencing fits with the map I'm creating, because there's obviously a very fine line between, I guess, the grunge of zombies compared to the, for lack of a better term, realism of multiplayer. Yeah, I'd probably say more so, yeah, with multiplayer, not even zombies in official COD titles. Like I'll definitely go into it and look at it, but I think with where zombies is at in terms of its sort of overall quality, it's I'm not up to that level yet, I would say. So I'm like,
Oh
I
no,
look at
I
it, I'm
would
like,
I would
man,
I
like
would
I don't
definitely
know if I'm
say
gonna be able
you're
to
up
pull
to
that off.
the Treyarch level. Just look, I mean, the maps you've made, I mean, the just the most recent one, C Block, is just so, it's
Mm.
beautiful. I think it is such an amazing, just a small compact area, and you detail it so well, and I think
Yeah,
it's
well,
just
it's
outstanding.
yeah, it's sort of funny you mention it, because I think it's the first map that I've made where like even I'm noticing the quality visually, and I'm looking at, I'm like man, like the quality of it in terms of not the quality of the map itself, like in terms of what it offers, but the, like the aesthetic, or the you know, the color tones and the palette and
Mhm.
the way that the resolution looks and everything like that. Like I'm playing through it, I'm like, man, like the quality that I'm looking at, it's like it, I'm noticing it's on another level even for me. And you, like, if I'm comparing that to, you know, maps like Interment or not Interment, sorry, Terminus or Alexandria or things like that, where, you know, they're still good. Like I'm definitely proud of them in their own right, but they're, I guess what assets are provided to us back when I was making those maps, it's different to what I'm working with now, which is obviously really awesome.
Yeah, no, I definitely think the T7 assets are really great, but like going onto
Mm,
sites like DevRaw and getting stuff from, particularly, I'm a fan of the Modern Warfare 1 and 2 remasters and then World
yeah.
War II assets. I think those, if a mapper gets those, it can seriously level up their maps visually just by using assets that aren't on most maps.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's sort of like not my downfall, but it's one of the things for me where because majority of my workshop sort of items are Walking Dead related, a lot of it is because it's out of passion, a lot of it sort of requires me to, I guess, make models out of brushes so that it's replicating the source material as much as possible. And the thing is, like, no one's really going to know that. Like, if I take C Block as an example, and Interment as well, because that's sort of where C Block originally derived from.
Mhm.
You take things like the cell doors or the staircase or like the guard tower, the catwalk, the holding cells, whatever it may be, all of that is like brushwork, right? And because I don't know how to like make models like Maya and Blender
Yeah,
and things like
me
that. I have
me
no
neither.
experience
It's like
with that shit. So like all of that stuff is me making that from brushwork and prefabbing it and detailing it, within the prefab and whatever. And so it's sort of like a hindrance in that regard, because I could probably get such a better quality out of my maps if I just relied on models, because models, generally speaking, look a lot better than models made from brushes do. I don't know if you feel the same, but like I feel that. So like there might be a particular part of the map where it's like that looks really really good, but then there's just this standout model made from brushes that doesn't look quite as good or quite as detailed because of that. And that can come down to you can add things like terrain patches and whatnot to really get the most out of that. But I guess you can argue that it's so insignificant that people who watch the show or are familiar with the source material, they're not going to notice it. Like
Mhm.
they'll just walk right by it. But for me personally, I'm like, I love to know that sort of stuff and really really refine the sort of nitty gritty details as much as I can in that sense.
No, yeah, definitely adapting something that comes from a source material. You want, as a map creator, to make it most of the part as faithful as you can, and then adding your own twist to it.
100%.
I would love to
Mm.
ask, like, why The Walking Dead? What made that so special to you, and why you wanted to bring that into the custom scene? Because I think you are really the standout Walking Dead person. You've made so many fantastic projects on it, and I just want to know where that inspiration came from.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Like I've definitely obviously got a flair for it. In terms of I guess the why or the how sort of thing. When I came into the tools for the first time, like The Walking Dead at that point in time was my favorite, not only show but my favorite like franchise, right?
Mhm.
And I think at this point in time, the show was sort of at its peak, at least in my opinion. Like it had its most viewership. The content and what was going on in the show was sort of not so much relative, but it was just like it was interesting
Yeah,
to the
you were
majority,
really
right?
connecting with it.
Yeah, yeah, and this is coming from someone who is also like very familiar and as much of a fan of the show as the comics as well. So I think at that point in time, it was just like I remember watching specifically Prison Mission from World at War, and anyone who is familiar with that, it was basically the prison from The Walking Dead, but it was in World at War. And I remember watching NGT Zombies play that specifically, and really really enjoying my time watching it. I never played it, but also thinking to myself how much of like a for lack of a better term, and not to knock the creator of that map, but how much of a bootleg version of the prison it actually was, right?
Mhm.
And again, that's no shade at the creator, because everyone's different in their own right, and my maps aren't perfect. Like everyone, obviously, like everyone's entitled to their opinion, and people enjoy my maps, people don't. Like it's really just whatever your flavor is, right? But I remember watching that and sort of being there and being like, man, like I'd love to see this prison be brought into the game in a much more accurate and I guess higher quality way. So that was sort of what opened that door for me. It was just like screw it, I'm just going to have a crack at it, and I'll see what pans out. And like I said earlier, I did maybe 4 or 5 attempts at the map, and each and every time I thought the map was the shit. But sort of going back and looking at it, and I've got lots of like old photos and stuff, like it was really arse. And there's like even photos of Interment now, like I can go back and play through it and look at them, like there's lots of areas that are really thrown together compared to other areas of the map. So I haven't mentioned it yet, but with C Block Survival and with the remake or the remaster I'm doing in total, like I'm really looking to, I guess, revitalize those areas and expand on them, make them a lot nicer and a lot better and a lot cleaner. But yeah, NGT Zombies, Prison Mission, and just The Walking Dead being my favorite show. That was what really drove me to want to do it.
I think that's so amazing, just like having that kind of just passion for a project and like putting it into the world and just making it alive and revising. Like I think you said 4 times for Internment. How do you end up picking the locations that you want to set a map in when you're adapting from The Walking Dead?
I think it comes down to, I guess, what I find cool first and foremost. But I guess sort of going into it more now, I sort of think with relevance to how much exposure that location actually has in the show that I can reference. Because I don't really have much in the way of a creative mind for something like really unique from the ground up, like no reference or source material to go to. So if I'm doing things like The Walking Dead or even other maps like, The Last of Us, and I did the Doctor Who map for FPS Psycho and whatnot, it's obviously a lot easier to create and design that map from the ground up when you have a lot more source material for it. So Alexandria is a good example of that. Like Alexandria being sort of like the prime location beyond sort of season 6. There's so much, and it's a real life location that you can reference, so it makes it so easy, right? Whereas the prison, it's obviously they spend a good amount of time there, 1.5 seasons or whatnot, but because it is a set as opposed to a real location, you've kind of got to put areas together because they don't actually make sense when you look at it from how it shows on the show versus how it actually looks in real life.
Yeah, set can be like bigger and have a little bit more space to work around when like the location itself, like if they go in exterior, it could be a lot smaller.
Yeah, exactly that. And the prison's a good example. Like, anyone who looks into it would know, but like I obviously know because I've spent so much time like going over the source material, but it's just like I'll be doing the main parts of the prison, and then there'll be little snippets here and there in the episodes where it's like, okay, well, you're in a boiler room now, but that boiler room connects to this area of the map, and like it doesn't make sense. So you're trying to be as faithful to the show as you can, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense and you got to wing it, right? So yeah, for me personally, if I'm referencing a source material, I'm going to try and find something that has the most sort of reference as possible to get it as accurate as possible.
When you have to make those changes, is it more of like a layout change? Like, oh, say the boiler room, it's on the other side. Do I have to move it in the game, or should I keep it in one area, or is it more of like a less of an overhaul and more of well, it works here, so let me keep it there?
It's different depending on, right? So like if we use the boiler room as an example, and I guess for anyone listening who I guess is familiar with The Walking Dead or familiar with the map, the boiler room is sort of like it's the area downstairs where Rick's on the phone and he's looking for Laurie and things like that. But like in the show, it's on the right side of the prison, but in terms of how you get there, you've got to sort of go from the left side. And it doesn't really like work in the show because they just obviously they film the scenes and they cut it so that it flows that way. But then when you're developing the map, it's kind of like, well, how do I connect that series of tunnels to get to the boiler room when in the middle of the map, it's just this big open space? Because I think in the show, I'm pretty sure like the tunnel or the tombs, whatever you want to call it, like the really dark, like catacomby sort of area of the prison, I'm pretty sure it's meant to be underground, but from a film set perspective, it's not. It's just like in another warehouse.
Yeah,
or whatever.
They just have it on a separate soundstage.
Yeah. So when I'm making the map, like that tunnel, in theory, like when you look at it in the show, it's connected on the ground floor, but in the lore of the show, it's actually meant to be underground, and that's how it's supposedly meant to connect, right? So it's just little things like that where it's just kind of like, well, I can't really make that work with regards to how they sort of explain it on the show. So I'll just make it work in my own sense.
Mm-hmm.
And again, unless you're a really diehard fan of the show, you're not really going to know otherwise. But yeah, it's just a combination of either moving something to a different location if you don't otherwise have enough knowledge to know where it would be, and just making it up as like on the fly as you go.
Yeah, I think taking creative liberties when adapting a specific location can be a give and take. Like when I
Mm.
was working on Evil Dead, the map kind of didn't flow right because there was not really a way to get from the front yard or the backyard into the basement naturally. There was only one entrance. So I took
Yeah.
the creative liberty of putting these tunnels connecting the front yard and backyard into the basement. Are there any sort of creative liberties that you take for a map that isn't necessarily in the show but makes gameplay flow easier?
Look, for me, yes and no. So I think my biggest sort of flaw when it comes to mapping, and you'll see this like in a lot of my earlier works as well, or more so. But it's my maps don't have that traditional sort of Treyarch flow, and by what I mean by that is your circuit sort of mentality, right?
Mhm.
So you mentioned it on Evil Dead as an example. Like you've obviously got your prime way that you can go, but you've obviously got the alternative route as well. So I think from memory, you can either go through the cabin or you can go through that first sort of tunnel system on the left hand
Yeah.
side. Yeah, so like for you in that sense, you've obviously taken that creative liberty to introduce that, so there's an alternative flow. Whereas if I refer to Interment as an example, for me, I'm just making the map so that it's as accurate as possible to the source. I'm not really making it with like, I'm not sitting there mapping and being like, okay, well, we'll go this way or this way kind of thing. I'm just building it and then I'm thinking about that after, which is a really poor way of developing a map if you're serious about the gameplay. So it wasn't until the Sanctuary where I actually sort of considered that more for the first time, and sort of the way that I tend to do things is I'll typically have like a spawn area which has one door, and then after you open that door, then it will branch out into two options or two routes.
Yeah, kind of like a Gorod Krovi thing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's still something I'm struggling with because I'm like the remaster I'm doing of Interment is a good example of that, because that's again just a classic case of me like just trying to make the prison as sort of large and as accurate as possible. But I'm at a point now where I'm just kind of like fuck, like where am I going to start? Like where's the spawn? Like which way are we going to go?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's always been more about trying to do more of an experience than anything. So a lot of my maps, C block, or maybe not C block, but Terminus and Alexandria, Interment, all that sort of stuff. It's more meant to feel like a Walking Dead experience more than anything, with sort of the gameplay or I guess the path being more of like a second thought. Which again, I don't encourage that for anyone who's listening and making maps. I definitely advise you to think of your layout ahead of time, and figure out what's going to be playable, which way is the player going to be able to go, things like that. Because it's definitely tricky and it's not a good way to approach it.
Yeah, I think you have more of like a Treyarch formula in the way you present everything, but still having like an experience to it. I want to know, do you enjoy kind of experimenting with your mapping styles between different maps? Because I know you've definitely innovated on mechanics with Left Behind, and I hope I'm saying this right, Yautja. But is that something you would like to see further with just kind of experimenting with that Treyarch formula?
I think it's going to come down to what the map is for starters. So like the examples you gave, so Yacha and Left Behind, they're obviously based on two other source materials, right? So two source materials different to The Walking Dead. So if you take The Last of Us or Left Behind as an example, and that map specifically was made for the contest as well. But that's something that we want to explore further in terms of like a fully fledged map. And the mechanics of that, like if you're going to try and replicate a different source material, especially another game, I definitely think it's important to try and replicate or mimic those mechanics as much as you possibly can. It definitely makes it tricky though, especially within this community, because it really does come down to either A, your abilities in what you can do yourself, or otherwise B, who you know and what contacts you have within the community who can otherwise help you achieve what you want. We're very fortunate to be connected to Fnatic in this instance,
Oh
because I know
yeah,
he's
for,
helped you
for
with,
certain.
yeah, because I know he's helped you with Evil Dead, and I assume other projects as well. And it wasn't until I saw Evil Dead that I actually reached out to him and was like, hey, like I really love the work that you did on that. Would you be interested in doing X, Y, Z? So very, very blessed and very fortunate to have been able to reach out to him and he be interested in what I have to offer as well. So I think for me, it's like I'm quite mindful of the maps or projects that I'm going to start, because it's ultimately going to come down to, okay, yes, I can map it, but in terms of the mechanics, either who can do it or is it possible? Because I don't have much of a knowledge on scripting and things like that
Oh yeah,
to
me
know
neither.
whether or not it's going to be viable. It's definitely something I'd like to explore more of, but it's hard when you're sort of relying on one person, in this case, or in my case, Fnatic, and knowing that they also have other projects that they're working on as well, because it does slow down those processes, here
Mhm.
and there, because you are obviously, of the understanding that those individuals are working on multiple things at once. So yeah, look, I'd like to explore it, and The Last of Us is a good example of it, because that's something that we're both very passionate to bring to the custom zombies community.
Mhm.
Otherwise, outside of that, if I'm making just sort of like a zombies map, otherwise like it's intended to be Call of Duty Zombies, I typically try and stay as close to the Treyarch formula as possible, but I'll derive different mechanics from different, COD zombies, right? So like Black Ops 6 has a lot of features and aspects that I really like, and Black Ops 3 has a lot of aspects, and Black Ops 4, things like that, right? I'll like to sort of chop and change where I can. And in those cases, if I'm not having access to other individuals to help me out with it, it'll probably be more along the lines of seeing what's available on sites like DevRaw and things like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, no, definitely trying to get that aspect with the scripting and coding. Fnatic has helped me out more times than I can count, and being able
100%.
to have that kind of workflow with somebody is one of the best feelings that you can get. So when you're making a map, I know you're kind of focusing on like having it be as aesthetically pleasing to
Mm.
whichever source you're adapting. But when it comes down to the Easter eggs, what is your kind of philosophy behind them? Do you design it to be also accurate to the show itself, or do you want to kind of do your own thing with them when you are able to get an Easter egg done?
So I'm just gonna go out on the record and say I suck at Easter egg ideas. For anyone listening, that is why my maps don't have Easter eggs, or the Easter egg steps just don't make sense, or whatever. Um, Look, I'm kind of a bit of both, right? So I I don't really have much exposure to Easter eggs first and foremost. Like a lot of what I know is really just from Cold War and
Mhm.
from Black Ops 6, because I'm like they're the first COD Zombies games where I'm actually doing the Easter eggs.
Oh wow.
I did a few like back in the day. Like I remember doing Ascension back in the day, and I think I did part of Transit, but as far as like Easter eggs go, like I never did like Gorod Karovi. I never did any of the Black Ops 4. I think I did Der Eisendrache once. So when it comes to ideas, like I really struggle with the ideas, and that's sort of where I rely on the scripter to sort of help me out in that sense. Usually what I'll do is I do try and incorporate elements of the source material, and again, The Walking Dead being sort of like my core aesthetic, if you will. I do try and incorporate that, but where I sort of get a little bit stuck is that if I'm going down that sort of rabbit hole, then I get stuck in that mindset of making it as lore based as possible. And
Mhm.
so I'm like, oh no, like, well, that can't happen in this universe. So like I'm not going to do that. So yeah, it makes it tricky. So
Yeah, you kind of come at it from more of like a story aspect. You want it to fit within the narrative that you're telling.
yeah, yeah. Like I think the Sanctuary is sort of a good example of that, right? Where we did like a whole piece of artwork which was meant to replace the HUD, and that artwork was meant to just basically be bits of paper on like a bulletin board that sort of outlined all the side quests and the main quests and things like that, and how that sort of fit into the map.
Mhm.
So if you take the Sanctuary as an example, where the sort of the core Easter egg quest is basically get the fuses, power the generator things, and then that activates the teleporter, right? And so when we were doing that artwork to replace the HUD, those sheets of paper would explain, okay, the power's down, but the backup generator is powering the rest of the facility. In order for us to get out of here to get the teller up and running, but we can't use that same backup generator because it's at full capacity or whatever. And in order to get it up and running, you would need fuses, and you would need to find an alternative way to power it. And then it went on to sort of explain how you might go about finding those fuses. Staff used to carry them around, and that was meant to be tied to the dead bodies and whatnot. Old shipments containing fuses, and that would tie to the shipping container step. So little things like that. So it was a matter of sort of like trying to find something that was story based, but didn't necessarily fit The Walking Dead itself, but it fit the environment. And that's pretty logical for any map, I would say. Like, obviously having steps that are based on your surroundings.
Yeah.
But I just get stuck in that sort of that rut where I hit a bit of a wall in terms of, okay, well, do I try and incorporate elements of the source material or not, or do I just go for something completely out there and different?
Yeah, I think, see, this is why I love you, bros, because you're just kind of like, it's all about kind of making it the experience of the map itself. And it's not maybe like, oh, I'm gonna pull this idea from this other map because it's cool and it doesn't really fit. Like, for you, I find it's always just kind of like making it work within the environment, within the map itself, and the kind of like the subtle narrative that you're telling. I find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I think as well, it's like I've always been, like I said, like I don't do Easter eggs, so I've always been like I guess a gameplay first kind of person when it comes to me playing the map. So I'm always striving to try and have lots of stuff to do without necessarily that meaning that there needs to be a main quest. So things like Derizen Drak and Mauer to Toten are like probably my two favorite maps, and Mauer to Toten's like a great example. Like I used to run that map back like 24/7 back in the day.
Too.
And I loved, the process of, getting Klaus set up and, getting, I'm trying to think of what else there was on the map. It's been ages since I've played it, but there were just lots of little things that you could do in the map, and I like that in maps. So for me personally, like if I'm making a map, I'm not really making it with consideration to the Easter egg. I'll definitely do it as I'm mapping. Like if I'm like, oh, like this would be a cool place to have a step, and maybe we could do this or that in there. And so I'll definitely note stuff down as I go, and then I'll see if I can sort of piece something together afterwards. But I'll more so be looking and be like, okay, we're building this here. What we'll do is we'll add like a sniper tower trap, and there's going to be an upgrade quest for that, and the player can do that if they wish to do so. It gives them something to do other than just run around, get perks, and hit the box, right? Because when it comes to a main quest, you've really got to figure out what all the steps are going to be, how it ties together, and how it ends. And I feel like 90% of the player base is wanting boss fights these days. I don't care for boss fights. Like I can so easily just jump into a map, do a bunch of steps, and hit a Bible, or just end the game. And boss fights are hard as well in their own right, because you're relying on someone who knows how to either port or create a boss from the ground up.
Yeah.
And there's very few people who know how to do that.
Yeah, definitely getting like a boss from scratch is something that is really difficult to do.
100%.
I don't want to spoil too much of the map I'm currently working on, but we have kind of like this ending idea, and thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be amazing. It's going to be cool. It'll tie into the narrative. And then I think about like how the mechanics of it will work. I'm like, well, I have no idea. Like I just see like kind of this thing and it looks cool, but like like adapting it and making it work is just so out of the realm of imagination. I'm like, I just kind of get like a block.
Boss fight confirmed, ladies and gentlemen.
Boss fight confirmed.
Boss fight confirmed.
Do you ever find yourself, whether it's like mapping an area or trying to find references, getting into like this writer's block type of a thing where you hit a wall and you can't get around it?
100%. 100%. I think that's everyone. I'd be surprised if there wasn't anyone who was like that. And, you know, if you look at any one person's sort of Radiant launcher or whatever you want to call it, you know, most people more often than not have like 12 projects created on there.
Yeah.
I've got so many. I've got like, let me have a quick look. I've got Interment Remaster. I've got I'll announce it here because why not? And I'm currently it's still in progress.
Big scoop.
Big scoop, big scoop. It's not like a secret. Like I've posted it in you know some of the servers, but I haven't officially announced it like on my server or Twitter or anything like that. I've got basically a town remaster, which I know there's a lot of town remasters. Don't come at me with your pitchforks. But no, it's a town remaster, but it's actually remastered in the theme of Liberty Falls. So it's basically going to be a Liberty Falls aesthetic version of town. So not blown up, no lava, nothing like that. So that's the intent, and that's a project that I'm actually intending to do Easter eggs and things like that for, because it's a nice small map. I've got, you know, Liberty Falls to reference. I've got, you know, the OG Transit to reference, anything like that. So, you know, I've got those two. I've got. I was going to do a Nuketown remaster at one point. I was going to do the White House at one point. What else? I was going to do like a sort of an alternative to Doris at one point, which was, instead of it being like the weapons factory or whatever. Well, it was still going to be like a weapons factory, but it was going to be a daytime overgrown sort of Doris, but not just a remake. Like it was going to be a full-fledged like custom map, but just as basically like a Site B sort of thing. You know, Doctor Who, Sanctuary, lots of survival variants of existing maps. I've got a couple of sort of back end projects that are on commission that I can't really talk about the specifics of, but I got a few of those.
Secrets.
Secrets. That's it. I was going to do a zoo at one point, so I've got all these files, right? And I guess with relevance to your question, it's kind of like, well, I'll be working on a map, and, you know, I'll take the Liberty Falls town map as an example, and I'll hit like a bit of a creative block in terms of, you know, how to approach something, or, you know, how to make it sort of make sense to the building or whatever it might be. And so if I can't really sort of figure that out, then I might just transition back over to like the prison remaster, right? Because it's one of those things where I'm at a point now where the map itself is like drawn up, it's like all laid out, but now I'm just doing the detailing, and like that's easy because that's just a matter of sort of placing items that resemble the place being a livable space. But it just comes down to sort of where I'm at with each map. You know, if I'm at a point where now I'm waiting on scripting, or I'm trying to come up with ideas, and I might just work on a side project in the interim just to avoid that burnout. Because, you know, you might be the same with what you're working on, where it's just kind of like you spend so much time on it. Yeah, you spend so much time on it that you just sort of get to a point where it's like, oh, I've done this for like a week straight now. Like I just need to do something a little bit different. And that's why I'm glad to be sort of alternating between the prison and the Liberty Falls, because they're two very different aesthetics.
No, yeah, I'm definitely like my main focus right now is Army of Darkness, but sometimes I do get like really burnt out on that. And so then I'll just like transition to one of the other two maps, my two other maps that I'm working on, either the one that I'm making for Fnatic, which that one's mainly I'm blocking out, and that one's a really big one, so I can just kind of like make these broad stroke brushes of like buildings or terrain, and I'm just like, okay, this is nice, this is therapeutic. I'm just kind of like roughly getting everything out in these big strokes, and I can detail it later. And then with another map I'm working on, it's like, okay, now I've got all these brush strokes done. Let me actually detail in an environment that isn't a medieval castle and it's more modern. And I find that very relaxing.
Yeah, for sure. And like the other two maps outside of Army of Darkness that you're referencing. So I'm pretty sure I know what they are, but are these maps that are sort of private or public releases once they're done?
These are all going to be really public releases.
Yeah.
I don't I don't want to throw shade at people because I really love the mod tools community and I love all the people in it. But
Mm.
at with the same coin, having like full maps be Patreon exclusive, like I think the Call of
Mm.
Cthulhu map was like a completely Patreon exclusive map. I'm just kind of like
Was it?
I don't know. Is it out yet? I'm not too
I don't know.
certain.
I'm I'm
But
so far detached from like from customs in that
Mhm.
sense. I definitely agree though, in the sense that a map itself should never be behind a paywall indefinitely. Obviously, as you know, like I've had the C Block Survival map was an early access thing on Patreon for me, but was never intended to be sort of kept behind that indefinitely.
Right.
It was more just sort of obviously, if you're interested and you want to play sort of like the unfinished version of it, you're welcome to do so while showing support, kind of thing. But always intending to have that be released once I sort of had it polished and got everything tidied up.
Mhm.
Because for me personally, I don't like to release things publicly until it's at the quality that I want it to be at. But yeah, I definitely don't agree with like if people are making maps and keeping it behind a paywall exclusively, it's sort of poor etiquette.
100%. I think it's there are a lot of people in the community who are doing like really big projects and they
Mm.
have Patreon set up and I think it's nice to have it be like, yes, I'm making this map and yes, there is a Patreon, but it will be released. We are currently working on it. We're not taking like a 3-month hiatus like Danny might have done.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's constantly in develop, constantly being worked on, and a Patreon is just like an option if you want to support developers and then maybe get like early access to like unfinished builds of the map. I think
Yeah.
that's the way to do it.
And that's the thing as well, is like it's something that I sort of realized when I started my Patreon, but it's kind of like there's a very few sorry, there's a very slim portion of people who are wanting to financially support your projects. Maybe they're not coming to financially support you just because they want to, but most people I find are doing it because they're getting something out of it, right? And I'll take things like Verco's Transit Remaster as an example. Like I don't obviously don't know the specifics of the financials and whatnot, but
Mhm.
I'm speaking with relevance to what he's offering, right? And a lot of the things that he's offering is, your name in the map, a pack-a-punch weapon, named whatever you want to call it, whatever it might be, right?
Right.
It's being able to offer something that is going to entice people to, I guess, want to support you in that way. And I find that there's really not that much that we can offer as the creators, at least on a large scale, aside from early access. Because things like having your name in the map and whatnot, like, yeah, it's cool, but that's only going to appeal to a certain number of people, right? And my Patreon for the Walking Dead remaster is a good example of that, where it's like I'm offering, if you want to support at this sort of level, what I'm happy to do is like I can design a cell for you, like based on your personal preference, right? But that's only going to appeal to a certain number of people.
Mhm.
So it's kind of hard if you're doing a Patreon where the intent is to, earn money effectively, but you've got to be able to offer something that the majority of those followers or supporters are going to want. And I feel like most people are just wanting to access maps early. So there's a bit of a fine line, but keeping it behind a paywall indefinitely is definitely not the way to go about it. The only exception I would say that there is to that is that if the map is a commission specifically for a person,
Mhm.
right? Because they're the one who is paying you directly to make the map. Therefore, it's up to them if they would like to keep the map private or publicly release it.
Yeah, I think commission projects it's a very fine line. I have never I almost dabbled in a commission one time and
Mhm.
I was like not happy with it.
As in, you were approached by someone to make a map for them, or you asked,
Yeah.
like, you were going to ask someone to make a map.
I was approached by someone on someone on Discord and they were like, "Hey, could you make this map for me? I have a interesting idea. It's going to be like a Destiny raid, but it's in zombies." I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. Let me work something out." So I kind of worked out this
Mm.
spawn room in the style of Derice and then
Yeah.
then they just kind of fell off the internet. I was like, okay, thanks
Right.
for that. So now I just kind of have this playable space, which is, I mean, I think it looks nice, but it's not, it's I'm never gonna do
Mm.
anything with it. So commission work,
Yeah.
I have like a bit of an iffy kind of a thing on, like
Have your reservations.
yeah.
Yeah.
And also with like Patreons, I feel like I would want to start a Patreon because it's nice to get a little bit of money flowing. I like to see people like wanting something
Mhm.
that I'm working on. And I feel like, oh, okay, that's cool. But at the same time,
Yeah.
I would definitely fall into the category of a scammer because I work so slowly that people would just be like, oh, obviously he's scamming me because
He's not doing
he's
anything.
not doing anything. I'm like, I'm working. I'm it's just really slow.
Nah, I feel you because I'm the exact same, and I even put the disclaimer in my in like the paid tiers because like obviously for Patreon you can either join or it depends what you choose to do, but like for me I've got the option that you can join for free or if you want to show support then there's a couple of different tiers, right?
Mhm.
And for the tiers that are paid, like the first thing that it says, or maybe not the first thing, but like in the sort of description or the paragraph that sort of outlines um the tier, it sort of explains like just so you know, like I only know how to map. So when we're adding all these other features in, like I need to rely on other people and their availability to do it. So therefore it may take a while for these projects to be finished, basically, right? So I completely appreciate where you're coming from because at the end of the day, if you're a subscriber to a Patreon and you're subscribed as a paid member, ultimately you're going to want to get something in return for that payment, right?
Mhm.
And so therefore it stands to reason that most people, like if there's a particular benefit they're interested in, and I think this goes across most people that I know on Patreon within this community, but basically you can subscribe or pay once, get that benefit or that that reward, and then you can sort of unsubscribe from that
Mhm.
point, or at least revoke your subscription from a payment standpoint. And so like I think that's fair, if
Yeah.
you're making a one-time contribution and you're getting that benefit.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's kind of the system I have with Army of Darkness. Like when I'm streaming the map, like I have like if you donate to the stream, it's a one-time thing. You get like
Mm,
you can get your name on a whiteboard or you can get a pack-a-punch gun name. But other than
yeah,
that, I've got nothing else to offer at this time. Like I can't offer up like a Easter egg like, "Oh, I'll make you
like
a
a
custom
quest or something.
Easter egg."
Yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah, exactly.
the at the same it's like one, I don't want to make promises I can't keep, and two, I mean it's my fucking map. Your Easter egg is not getting into my map.
Yeah, there'd be some stupid ass like shoot the cock on the wall and get a
Yeah,
bloody unicorn weapon or
just
something.
something absolutely ridiculous that makes no sense
Yeah,
at all.
yeah, I'm the same, and it's sort of funny or interesting that you brought up the Patreon paywall thing initially, anyway, because when I initially started Patreon, and the only reason I started Patreon was because I was getting not heaps, but I was getting a few like odd messages here and there, being like,
Mhm.
"Do you have a Patreon so I can support you?" And I was like, yeah, well, screw it. Like I might as well start it. Like if people want to donate, they're obviously welcome. I'm not trying to force anyone to do it. But the irony in the fact that you brought it up and the reason you brought up is because when I was first starting the Patreon, that's where the whole survival, like Walking Dead C Block survival sort of idea birthed from, because I was like, oh, as an exclusive reward, I'll put out a survival version of my maps,
Mhm.
right? And then it wasn't until I was sort of doing it, I was like I feel like that's going to step on people's toes. Like people aren't going to be happy that they have to pay to get this. But then I was trying to justify it in my head, being like, well, I didn't have to make it. Like it's just something bonus to like sort of tie you over until the full map comes out, right?
Right, it's
Because
just
the
like
full
a
map's
just a little
obviously
thing.
intended to be, yeah, exactly. But I was like, nah, look, I probably should stay away from it, obviously, especially considering all the drama surrounding Danny and Green Run Productions and whatnot. So I steered away from that, and I was like, screw it. I'll just do the early access thing. That way, it's fair to everyone. Obviously, it's not gatekeeping it permanently. Like it's going to get released,
Mhm.
whatnot. And I just felt that made the most sense. In saying that, though, I haven't had anyone subscribe in that sense yet. All of my subscribers now are currently free, which it doesn't bother me. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm not here doing this to make money. It's just I'm doing it. If people want to donate, they're obviously welcome to do so.
Yeah, it's all about just kind of like supporting, and
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's more about the support, and and if people are wanting all these extra things done, like custom weapons and whatever, most often than not, that costs money, and it's hard to sort of always have to dip into your own pockets to get that done. Again, we're both pretty blessed to know a lot of skilled people who are willing to help out the goodness of their hearts.
Sure.
But that's not the case for everyone, right? And there's still instances now where I have to pay people to do certain things, and it's just one of those things where it's like, well, if you're willing to scrap that idea, that's fine. But if you want that and no one else is willing to do it for you, then chances are you're going to need to fork out some money for it, and and hope that just brings much more of a better quality to the map.
Yeah, I want to kind of touch back on like commission works and stuff like that, because I'm kind of in like a commission thing, but not really. Like, I approached somebody, I was like, hey, I want to do this with something you're working on, and I would love to do it for free. Like, I won't charge you a dime because it's something I want to do, and I would love to do it with you.
Yeah.
And I think the project I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, I also tell them, I'm going to do everything I can for free, but what I can't, we're going to have to find somebody else, and they might charge me, and I don't, I'll do my best, but I don't, like, it depends on what we want to do is going to be a cost, and I don't know if I'll be able to pay that. So you might have to pay a little extra for this feature. It's this interesting dynamic with like, I guess, capitalism in the modules community, and just commodifying it, and having money in it. When you start out, you're just like, oh, I'm working on a little map, I'm gonna do my thing. And now for me, I find that I'm like, okay, well, if I want something really big, that's gonna be like $50, $100, God forbid, like I'm looking at $1,000 payments, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so like I know what you mean, because I'm dabbling in a bit of commission at the moment, and like that's no secret. So I'm working on a few things with FPS Psycho, and he initially approached me about a full-fledged map, and it was a Doctor Who map, and so that's sort of where the Doctor Who survival sort of stemmed from. But when we were sort of talking about the finer details, I was like, look, I've never done commission before. I don't really know like what my price would be. You know better than anyone as well, like how much effort goes into a map. So it's kind of a bit of a weird one, because if you are in that sort of space of sort of working on commission, you got to find a price that's reasonable for you in terms of how much time you're spending on it versus what's reasonable for them as the person paying for the project. Because at the end of the day, hundreds and thousands of dollars is a lot for a single map. But in the same breath, we are spending hours, like hours on hours on hours. Like, Sanctuary took me over a year to make. And that's not to say I was working on it every day for the span of a year, but, in total, like it took a year to make. But that was one of the things I said to him, was like, okay, well, let me know what it is that you're after for this larger map, like the full-fledged Doctor Who map, and I'll tell you if it's viable or not, basically. And so I'm not going to go into the specifics, because should we ever do that map through end to end, which I'm thinking that we probably will at some point. But I do want to sort of keep those details under wraps so that he can obviously showcase them for the first time. But there were elements of the map that he was after in terms of the features and the mechanics and whatnot. And I said, look, like they're definitely doable. I don't know how to do it. And so whilst I'm obviously very flattered that you've approached me and that you're appreciative of the way that I map and the way that I do things, it might be more logical if you found a mapper or someone who can do all of what you're after. That way it's sort of one fixed price. And so we were discussing that, and ultimately landed on, he would prefer to go with me and whatnot. I said, look, not a problem. Like, that's no problem. But just so you're aware, like on top of whatever it is that I may charge, any additional custom things that you're going to want, you're going to need to fork out extra money for it, because these things can cost, upwards of $100, right? And it depends on what it is. If you're talking like custom weapons or AI or whatever, it really comes down to what it is and who you know. So I don't really know many people who can do custom weapons and AI and whatnot, whether it be for free or like I know people who know the basics of it and can sort of throw something together. But if you're looking for like a high quality piece of work in that sense, it's probably going to cost money to get someone to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I laid that all out to him. I'm like, yeah, look, so I just wanted to make sure like you understand that, because if that is the case and you want those things, I'm going to need to go to someone else and get a quote and find out how much it's going to cost. And then that's going to need to tack onto your total. Right. So I completely get where you're coming from in that sense with whoever it is that you're working with in that sense, because especially in your case, if you're offering to do it for free out of like the goodness of your heart because you're passionate about those projects, I dare say that it's not necessarily unfair, but it does hurt when you have to fork out money for other elements where other people are going to sort of reap the benefits of that, right?
Yeah. I do want to go back on this Doctor Who map for 1 second, because I also had the idea of making a Doctor Who map, but I just want to know, are you going to make the transition from inside and outside of the TARDIS completely seamless?
It's not something that we've really explored yet, because it's ultimately going to be a matter of what FPS Psycho wants. And like obviously I'll give ideas and whatnot, but I don't know Doctor Who. Like I've never watched it.
Oh, really?
So yeah. So, and I said this to him as well. It's like it's obviously a little bit harder when either A, you're not familiar with the source material, or B, you're not passionate about the source material, right? So obviously like money's a good motivator, yeah, but it's the biggest thing when making a map is your passion behind what the project actually is. And so I would ultimately just be going on whatever direction he's giving me. So if he's saying, I want to be able to access this place, but in order to do it, you've got to go through the TARDIS to get there, or whatever it may be, then I'll obviously work in my best way to make that happen. And I'll reference the episodes and whatnot to try and get it as close to as possible. But yeah, it's really just going to come down to whatever direction I receive from in this case, the director of the project, right? So yeah, possibly. I don't really know how the TARDIS works. As far as I understand, it's sort of like a not a teleporter, but like you hop in it and it flies you to new places or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of like a. Oh, let me just break down Doctor Who really fast. It's kind of like a. It's a little. I mean, it's big, but it's just kind of like this box that if you go into, it's just way bigger on the inside. So
right, okay.
I when I was kind of thinking about making a Doctor Who map, I was like, yeah, I would love to do it, but at the same time, like, how am I gonna make something that is larger on the inside? Like, you could go up to like the box and just hold F, and then your screen goes to black, and then it comes back up, and now you're inside it. But like, my idea would be like, I just want to walk right through it and have that be completely seamless.
There's something you can add, which is like an automatic teleport thing, right? So you see it on like your tower maps a lot, where you fall off the map and it just brings you back to spawn.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could easily do something with that mechanic and just sort of put that brush or that trigger, whatever it may be, put it in the TARDIS door and have the door open, and you just step into it and you're obviously inside whatever the TARDIS room is, right? That's how I envision that it would probably work if that is how it would be done. But I'm sure that there's a way to make it more seamless than that, and I think from memory the Monsters Inc. map did that.
Yeah, okay, now I gotta play the Monsters Inc. map. The workshop might be filling up with some Doctor Who maps, depending on if
it's possible.
If I can, because that would be like the core mechanic. If I would even be willing to do that map, it would have to, for me, it would just have to be seamless. You'd have to like look inside, kind of move around outside, see that it is indeed bigger on the inside, and then walking through and having that transition being completely, just completely fluid.
I was just gonna say, like, the thing is as well, like the fact that you're saying, that you're either passionate or familiar with Doctor Who, it's like, now that I know that, like, you're always someone that I could potentially onboard into that project as well, and we can work together to make that as either accurate or as sort of good as possible for what it's actually intended
Oh
to
yeah,
be. Because again,
that'd be
I don't
amazing.
know the source material or anything like that, so I'm just going off what I see more than anything.
I want to say I did feel really bad like earlier when you when you were telling me that you wanted to make a type of map, and I was like, "Oh, I'm already doing that. You want to you want to hop on with that project?"
No, that's all right. I don't feel bad at all because you're doing such a good job with it, like a much better job than I would
Oh,
have
no, dude,
visually.
you'd have done amazing. Like I still
Ah,
want to have like
appreciate it.
I want to give you like prefabs of that and then just be like, "Okay, well, if you want to do this section, like once I get the full block out,
Yeah.
I just kind of want to give it to you and just be like, "Do your thing, man. Cook on it."
Well, that's the thing is like I think for what I was envisioning for that particular project, and I apologize for the listeners because we can't
Yeah,
name
a
it because obviously it's under wraps.
little vague.
But for that project that you're working on, I think visually you're sort of approaching it in very much the same way that I would have liked to. But I think where we may have differed would have been sort of like the not so much the mechanics of the map, but I guess just what features and stuff were
Mhm.
in it because I had a very clear idea on sort of what I wanted it to be. And I think I don't know if you're sort of working on this on behalf of someone else, right?
Yeah, on kind of like two people, but it's kind of like they have like a story they want to tell, and I'm gonna like help them tell that story.
Right.
But it's also the same
Okay.
idea where it's like, well, I'm gonna give you ideas. This is kind of what my idea for it is gonna be.
Mm.
You can tell me no, and I'll stop, but this is what I'm gonna be doing. And if you like
Yeah.
it, I'm just gonna keep going.
And I think that's the thing as well. Is like obviously because you're making the map for someone else ultimately, and same logic with commissions, right?
Mhm.
It's that you are obviously going to be able to have your input to a degree, but in the same breath, it's really going to come down to what is it that this person or these people want from the experience, right? And so in my example of Doctor Who, it's kind of like, again, not being familiar with the source material or anything like that. I'm just going solely on, what would you like to see in the map? Whereas if it's a map that you're sort of passionate about, in this case, what you're working on and what I was going to work on, it's kind of like, man, like I have so many cool ideas for this, but you like I want to make sure you're okay with them too. Like I don't want to sort of step on anyone's toes kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
I think it's good in that sense because you just spitball ideas like, hey, look, this might be cool, or would you be open to this or that, whatever it may be. So I think once that project does come together fully, I think it'll be probably I think it would probably be one of if not the best maps on the workshop if done right.
Oh man.
And that's not to say I have any doubts in your abilities. I think it's just going to come down to the main story and everything else that the map has to offer.
Mhm.
Because I think I'm surprised it's not officially been done. And we've got a few bootleg versions of it
Yeah,
on the
there's kind
workshop.
of
Again,
there are some
not to
attempts
throw
on the
that word around
workshop.
too
Yeah.
much. There's some attempts on the workshop, and the people who enjoy playing it. That's not to knock anyone, but for people like yourself and myself, I feel safely that I can say we both appreciate more of a Treyarch quality in the
Mhm.
maps we make and play. So I tend to stray away from sort of like those not thrown together maps, but just the maps that don't have a lot of passion put into it. And that's as simple as, missing probes or, low resolution textures, whatever that may be, right?
Yeah, well, I feel like sometimes with that, like it also comes to not having enough knowledge with the tools
Yeah.
themselves. Like I see a map and I can tell like, oh, this person is passionate. They wanted to make this, but at the same time, I feel like the knowledge base for the community is very limited. That's kind of the reason I wanted to start like this podcast is just get the thoughts
Mm,
of like people who are at the top of the mod tools and understand their workflows. Because I mean, sure, you have like what comes to my mind is like a logical edits tutorial series, which I find to be more for like intermediate mappers where it's like this is what
mm.
you do when you're uploading to the workshop. This is how you properly port weapons. This is how you can kind of do UI. And I'm like, okay, that is really interesting to me as a intermediate mapping style. And then you have someone like Jaybird, which is like, these are the basics. If you can master these, you can make everything.
Yeah.
But even then, I feel like there isn't like a database where you can just be like, okay, I need to look up reflection probes because I need to know how to probe my map. And you look it up, and then it's just like Verco's How to Light, in which that is a very
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
series, but at the same
Mm.
time, it's not everything. And I wish I've been toying around with the idea of making it, but I just don't have the time to do it. Of just making like this 100-page like document or something where it's just like a textbook of how to map, and it's just like, if you need to use a reflection probe, here are all the settings, here's what they do, this is the optimal way to do it, here's how to do it in practice, these are the different ways you can shape a reflection probe to a room. And it would just kind of be like that, like less of a video series, more like a textbook. I feel like if somebody,
Yeah.
I know there are like a few wikis and there's a bunch of stuff on Modbee, and you, if you ask somebody in like a Discord, everybody's willing to help, but it's like the knowledge isn't there, like just fully written out for a new mapper to like get that information. You have to really look for it.
I think it's interesting you bring it up because like I often refer to your little like PDF thing that you sent through. I can't remember what it's called, but it sort of like explains the way that you sort of like what settings you put on your probes and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, right? And like I definitely find that helps in certain aspects because I like you mentioned, I referred to Verco's probe tutorial when I first learned how to probe, and like I found that very helpful, and that's obviously sort of given me everything I need to know to know how to probe normally. But there are those obviously a little additional things that you can sort of do to tweak it and make it just that little bit better. And I think the text document approach, it's interesting to me because I'm very much a visual learner,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm more inclined to watch a video than I am to read through a document, right? But in saying that, I definitely think that it's a valuable asset or a valuable tool to be able to have something that explains what each of the KVPs actually do in practice, right? Or being able to sort of control F and find keywords in order to find what it is you're after, because there's been many a time where I've been scouring videos on YouTube, and I'll be like BO3 mod tools, and I'll just go through everything that's there to try and find one piece of information. Whereas having something at your fingertips would be really nice as well. So I think for me, in an ideal situation, a combination of a document in addition to videos accompanying the steps
Mm-hmm.
would be good. But like you said, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work for one person too, especially when everyone's techniques are different, right? So you're ultimately going to be explaining it in a way that makes sense to you, and it obviously is easy for you to explain because you understand the way that you do it. But for someone who has no idea of what you're talking about, it's going to sound so foreign to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a fine line in the sense of it'll be hard to get it done right, but having just anything, like any kind of resource, would be really good, especially for people who are coming in for the first time. And like even now, like I'm still figuring out probes, and I'm still figuring out lights and then LUTs and blooms and colors and all that sort of stuff. And so it'd be nice to have a better understanding as to how that all works, because I'm just sort of like I'm putting it in, but I'm not really understanding what it's actually doing, or how it's doing it,
Right.
and the significance of it. It's just people tell you to do it, so you do it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it also comes with like intuition. Like you can make like the Google Doc that explains everything, but then when it comes to what texture do I make the floor, it's like, well, you're in a concrete building, uh, like what texture works? What does your intuition tell
Mm.
you? And that's something you can't really teach, which
No.
is kind of like, it makes creating maps a bit messy when you're teaching it to a new person because their intuition isn't there. And teaching somebody how to be intuitive and being like, okay, this texture works here, this model works here, like I can get the shape of the room correct, but having that ability to know what works where, like what model works where, what texture, how to probe it,
Mm.
the lighting, what makes lighting good. It's just that basic intuition that it's just super difficult to learn.
Especially if you're going into a map or a project, and especially as a novice or a novice, if you're going into a map or a project or whatever, and you're sort of building a room, but you're not actually thinking about what the room is, or maybe you are thinking about what the room is, but then when you're detailing it, you're not taking that into consideration, because you see it a lot with a lot of new people who sort of come into the servers, and they're making a room, and maybe it's a storage room or something, right? But the models that they're putting in there don't make sense for that. So maybe it's a kitchen, but then they're putting in ammo crates and whatnot. So
Mhm.
it's little things like that where if you're going into it and you're not really understanding what direction you're taking that room in, it makes it particularly difficult to both detail and then do your textures and whatnot. You see more often than not, like a lot of new starters will typically put wall textures on the floor and, floor textures on the roof or whatever it may be, because it looks good. But when you're actually sitting there thinking about it, it's like, I probably shouldn't use that texture because that's a wall texture. Like, that's plaster. Plaster wouldn't be on the floor,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, little things like that.
It's all about spitballing ideas, and
Mm,
that's what I found when I was like first learning, and then when I was kind of getting a little bit more advanced. Like, I had made so many maps before I released Evil Dead where I was just kind of spitballing ideas, and
mm,
getting feedback from like resources like Discord, or just showing friends like my maps, just that feedback and having somebody tell you what works, what doesn't. I feel like that's very powerful, and in helping you learn. When you were getting started, what was your biggest form of feedback did you find that was the most useful?
I don't know if it's the biggest form of feedback, or even necessarily if it's the most useful. It's definitely useful, especially for anyone who's listening who is starting out or still in the early stages of their, I guess, career in this or their hobby in this. But the biggest one that stands out for me was actually from Madgaz. So when I was releasing Interment, I had him and a few other people test the map,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of dead ends in the map. And that's something obviously like a good mapper or a map creator should avoid where able or where necessary. And I think it was, yeah, for him to sort of come out and say, when you're opening this area, there's nothing in there. Like, you're opening this door, but the only thing in there is one part, and that part might not always necessarily spawn in there. So the room is otherwise kind of pointless. It was little things like that. So that was something that I definitely took forward going forward, in the sense of, okay, what is the reason for going into this room, and how do you make that flow to connect to another room, sort of, if you're passing through there? Because, if you're playing a map, the last thing you want to do is sort of open a door, get in there, it's a dead end, and then you're fucked, right?
Mhm.
But I think for me personally, like, I don't have like a hatred for dead ends necessarily. Like, I think there's a certain instance in which it calls for it, and certain instances where it shouldn't. Things like mazes and whatnot. Like, obviously, it's logical to have dead ends in a maze, right?
Right.
But I think for me, it's sort of navigating that balance between the map flow and then the source material. And we come back to that again, because The Walking Dead is a good example of that, where it's a prison, and the prison has a lot of dead ends, right? And so it's a matter of, okay, well then, do I alter it to make it connect and flow better, or do I stick with trying to make it as accurate as possible?
Mhm.
And so I do often get stuck in those ruts or those dead ends sometimes, in terms of, do I make that sacrifice or not? Or I might just sit there and think, okay, how can I connect it in a logical way or a reasonable way that doesn't sort of interfere with the overall aesthetic or the design aspect of it?
Yeah, I think when like adapting a map as something like Interment or Alexandria, where you're trying to be very faithful to it, it does
Mm,
come across when you're like, yeah, that is a dead end, and that's very accurate. But at the same time, gameplay wise, it doesn't flow. I
yeah,
like some projects that I'm working on. I do get these like dead ends, and I'm like, oh shit, what am I gonna do? And my first line of thought is, because I'm such a terrible mapper, I'm like, okay, just delete the hours of progress you've worked on, because this is shit. And then
yeah,
that thought doesn't go away, and so I'm like, okay, I either delete this, or I just kind of I do a little extra work and I punch a hole in a wall, or I just
yeah.
give like this access to players. Do you find yourself like breaking holes in walls, or just like moving some bushes around to get rid of those dead ends, or how do you kind of counter that?
So up until now, I've always sort of gone with trying to combine COD Zombies aesthetic with Walking Dead aesthetic,
Mhm.
right? And so in those instances, it's sort of fine for me to go ahead and sort of destroy something or to I guess change it in a way that allows it to flow, right? Because in my head I'm like, okay, well, because we're doing that COD Zombies aesthetic, it's I can explain why this is broken, or I can explain why this is here, or whatever. Whereas if I take my Interment remaster as an example, I'm steering very much away from the COD Zombies aesthetic of it. Like, yes, there's obviously going to be elements of that, but I'm staying as faithful to the show as possible in the sense of, you know, bits of the buildings aren't going to be blown away and holes in walls and bits of debris everywhere. Like it's only going to be as destroyed as it actually is in the show. And so that's where it makes that tricky for me, because I'm at points where I'm like, okay, well, you know, we're here, but if I don't add a door or something here, it's going to be just a dead end, and you know, players are going to hate that, right? So I think for me, it's coming down to that project. So if I'm going or leaning into the vibe of COD Zombies aesthetic, then yeah, I'm happy to just blow open a wall and say, yeah, like that's there because it's COD Zombies. Like it's fine. Like if Treyarch do it and they grime and grunge it up and you know everything's falling apart, then that's fine. Like it's an easy excuse. But if you're doing a map where that's not present, but all of a sudden there's just a big hole in the wall, for me it takes me out of that. And I get the necessity for the flow, but if you're going to do it, then have it consistent across the entirety of the map.
Yeah, I think you have a very unique sense for map design and bringing players into experiences, and having that kind of being extremely faithful, so the map flow might not be as intuitive as a Treyarch map is kind of the a little bit of a drawback to having that experience be as faithful as it possibly can. And I feel like some people who play customs, they understand that it is adaptation, but at the same time they kind of want it their way, where everything kind of flows seamlessly and everything just kind of
Yeah.
works all the time. How do you handle some like criticism of maps that you get? It doesn't have to be about flow or anything, but just kind of criticism in general from people who play that map.
I think first and foremost, and like this obviously started with Interment, but first and foremost, I make the maps for me, right? I make the maps that I want to play. That's why there's more often than not there's no main quests and things like that, because I'm catering to what I like
That's a
first,
good way to
like
do it.
before anything. Yeah. So, but in saying that, like obviously I do want people to enjoy it. So there are going to be elements of that where I'm like, okay, well, I do want to cater to the public as well to some degree. And so therefore I might alter something so that it's more generally accepted as opposed to what I'm okay with. And so like a good example of that is if you sort of take a look at the shift between Interment to the Sanctuary. The Sanctuary is much more catered to that general COD Zombies style. And what I mean by that is if you look at sort of the layout, it follows that circuit and then it sort of cuts back through the middle, sort of like Kino. And, you know, the perk placements and the mystery box, you know, one being on each side after the same amount of points per door kind of thing. Because when I was doing Internment, it was just kind of like, I was, again, just doing it sort of like an experience, right? And so I was just sort of putting doors and barriers and debris wherever and zombie spawns, but not really thinking of how they flowed once you opened them. But with the Sanctuary, it was kind of like, okay, well, you've got this door here, it's 1500, then you've got two doors you can choose to go through. Both cost the same amount of points, and ultimately they're going to lead to the same point, and you're going to spend the same amount of points as you get there. So when it comes to feedback or criticism from comments on the workshop or in Discord or whatever it is, for me, it's kind of like, well, I'll take a lot of it with a grain of salt, but if there's genuinely good feedback, then I'll try and adopt that to my next project. Or otherwise, if the map is still in a stage of where it's getting updated and whatnot, then I'll put that in if I can. But I have to consider what is generally good feedback across the board versus what is feedback based on just what your preference is, right? Because I'm not going to cater to just one person. Like if one person is saying, oh, you know, this teddy is too hard to see, or this gun should be upped in damage a little bit, but 99% of the other people are saying, hey, Negan is too fast, or Negan is too quick, or whatever, then I'm going to obviously lean towards that feedback because that's what the majority are saying.
I find that to be like the best way to go about it is just kind of working with your own thoughts and figuring out what works for you, and definitely taking the criticism or people giving feedback on your maps and finding out if what they're saying is like right, or if that's something you definitely do need to change.
Mm.
It's definitely like a balancing act when you're taking in feedback, because you don't want to change too much of your original vision. But if something isn't working and then people tell you something isn't working, you probably know something isn't working. And
Yeah.
finding the balance between all that is one of the harder things to do when the map is, it's nearly done and you're letting people play test it, and they're
Mm.
like, okay, you should change this, that, and you're like, oh, but that's going to take a lot of resources to do, or maybe that's not what I intended, or this is how it's supposed to be, and if you don't like it, you know, uh, tough
So sad,
titties.
too bad. Yeah. No, I agree. And one thing that is always difficult as well, especially like in my case, because I'm relying on other people for scripting and things like that, is if the feedback is based on things that I either can't fix myself or don't otherwise really have like the control of, in a sense. So like if I take Negan as an example, or if I take the Predator from Yacha as an example, like those things aren't made by me. Like I've given the direction on what I think it should be and how it should function and whatnot. But ultimately, like if there's significant feedback on that, like yes, I can take that feedback and I can take it to that person. But I'm relying on the fact that I'm relying on the possibility, or the fact that that person is still active in the community first and foremost.
Mhm.
And then B, I'm also going on assumption that they're willing to fix that or willing to make changes at no additional cost if it's something I've commissioned, right?
Right.
So it's a hard one to navigate because yeah, like you might be raising good points, but I don't have another $50 to get this person to fix this thing for me. Like if you're willing to fork out some money to help me get it sorted, fantastic. Like let me know. But like in that case, I'm like, I just, yeah, like you hit a bit of a wall and you have no sort of option. Whereas if it's just a matter of, hey, this is clipped poorly, or it's too dark, or the sound is too loud, whatever it is, then yeah, like I can make those adjustments because they're things I can and know how to do, and I have direct control over that.
I think yeah, I think that's a great point. It's not always in your control when something
Hmm.
goes wrong. Most of the time I will take responsibility for shit, even if it's like not my fault. I'm like, yeah, dude, I that's on me. I'll take it.
That's on me. My bad.
But 99% of the time it is my fault. And I do my best to try to fix things around and make sure that everything's a-okay. But
Yeah.
it's like I said, it's a balancing act. It's weird to find that right sweet spot between what you want and what people like.
Yeah. 100%. I think a key one as well that I see not only on my maps but like on every map is that majority of people want hand holding when it comes to quests and steps, which I don't agree with. I think Easter eggs are meant to be Easter eggs. You're meant to figure them out. And like, yeah, you can have like breadcrumbs and whatnot and like little tidbits here and there that sort of imply or lead you in the direction of where you want to go. But for the people who just sort of complain about, you know, there's no indicator that tells me I need to go and do this, or else, well, like the purpose of the Easter egg is like you're meant to go figure it out. Like you're meant to find these things. Like if you want a guide, just go read the text guide, or if you go watch a video. Like so that's sort of my biggest gripe with a lot of the feedback I get is that people want that, but it's one thing that I not refuse to cater to, but it's just like it's like you don't need that though. Like it's not like just grow up. Like just find it. Just go explore the map and figure it out. Like yes, I can probably do a better job at like leading you to it and whatnot, but for you to come and sort of be there and sit there and be like, hey, like you need to add something that pops up on the screen that says, hey, the next thing you need to do is go and do this. because I don't like that. As good as it is in like Black Ops 6 to help you sort of get set up and whatnot, it just sort of it takes away from that mystery, and that it's a, you know, you see that with the modern day COD Zombies titles where the Easter eggs are being solved in 24 hours from release, right? Like I miss the days of watching people play through the map for like weeks and figuring out bits and pieces, and then like, you know, this person goes and figures something out. Obviously, you're not really going to get that in customs because that community or that sense of like, you know, joint investigation isn't really there. So therefore, most people are just sort of posting on there like, oh, here's what I found so far, and then people just add to the guide. But yeah, I don't know. The Easter egg stuff is sort of one thing I tend to just sort of throw to the wind. It's usually more about the gameplay or you know, bugs themselves that I'll typically put my focus on.
I think what you've done really well is kind of like bringing your opinions on your own maps and why you explain things to YouTube.
Mm.
I think your channel has done like a really great job at just kind of like analyzing your thought processes and reasons why you do certain things. Uh, why did you start the YouTube channel? What was kind of like the drive behind that?
So I think YouTube, it's always been something that's, I guess, kind of been at the forefront of my mind for the longest time, even back in like high school, as being something that I wanted to tackle. It's just in this day and age, there's so much content right now, and there's so little originality in what you can actually do and what you can bring to the table, right? And I think the one thing that is sort of not untouched, but there's not much of it going on, is not necessarily BO3 custom zombies, because there's a fair amount of that, with only a few notable names, but more so there's not really much in the way of people in this community who, like you, go and stream as they map and talk through, you know, the design process, right? And so I think for me, streaming is, if I'm streaming and mapping, I'm going to get too distracted. I'm not going to get any work done on the map. And you might appreciate this as well, but it's like you can spend so much time on such a little thing when you're mapping, right?
Yeah.
And so I often find that like that's me when I'm mapping. I'll spend a lot of time just sort of toying with an idea or sort of trying to refine details and get it looking right or whatnot. Next thing I know, an hour or two's passed and I haven't really made any progression, but I've sort of done what I set out to do.
That's kind of like the reason I've kind of stopped streaming as much, because I feel like I'm like wasting people's time when I get like into this little area. I'm like, okay, now I'm just kind of working on this small thing nobody really cares about, but you know, it's important to me, but it's not like as visually impressive as seeing like a full room be designed on stream. Like I've had some where it's like, okay, here's a block out of an idea. I'm now going to make the full room this stream. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Goodbye. And then there's some where it's just like, I'm working on this tiny little thing. Nobody's going to notice it. It's just kind of like this little pathway. We're going to be doing this for 3 hours.
Yeah. I think as well, the difference between like a stream and a YouTube video is obviously as well going to be like the viewer retention in that sense, because there's only a select few, you being one of them, obviously based on what you said, who are actually willing to sit through a stream and watch the creator go through their process, right? And so for me, I think what I was wanting to do was like, ultimately I wanted to go through and play like custom zombies maps to get exposure to not only like the design process of other people, but also like Easter eggs and things like that. And I felt like a good segue into doing that was to sort of just first talk about my maps and just get into the habit of how to articulate myself on a video, right? Because anyone who's sort of dabbling in YouTube or starting out for the first time, the hardest thing is, what the fuck do I talk about? Like, what do I do while I'm playing? And it's very different to streaming in the sense of whether you're new or you're well established on YouTube. If you even have at least 1 or 2 viewers, you've got a back and forth communication, and that makes it easier for you to talk on stream. Whereas when you're doing a video, like I said, like it's, what do you talk about? So why I started with the sort of development aspect of it was because I do see the value in and the importance of of development streams. But in saying that, I know how I am as a mapper, and I didn't think that me streaming was going to be as valuable as maybe a video would be.
Mhm.
Because I can stream for maybe 2-3 hours or so mapping, but I'm not going to do much. Whereas I could just play through the map, talk about it, talk about how I did this or why I did this, or what led me to do it or whatever. And it's giving me that practice to sort of speak on camera. Obviously, you have the ability to cut out and edit out things that either don't make sense or blunders or whatever.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on getting clipped saying some stupid shit. Like
I'm pretty sure my first video, the one I did on Interment, I'm pretty sure I said or like after every word or every sentence. If you go back, I'm sure there's like upwards of 100 likes or on that. But what I did was I left it as is. I left it all in. I'm like, what I'll do is, I remember watching a video from Mr. Beast ages ago, and he said for anyone starting YouTube, like your first videos are going to be shit. I'm like, oh yeah, obviously. It's like what I would encourage you to do is just improve something every time, right? And so I was like, I'll leave it in, and what I'm going to do is going forward, I'm going to try and reduce my and my likes. And I think there's a noticeable difference in the second video, and it's sort of gradually coming in because it's just the way that I talk. But I guess that desire to want to start playing through other people's maps and experience and get an idea for Easter eggs and things like that, just so that I do have a bit more inspiration when that time comes, because I do want to cater to those people who want Easter eggs in maps, but it's just not a strong suit for me. And that's sort of what drove me to want to start that channel.
Well, you're doing a great job so far. I've like tuned into every single video. Maybe like a couple of shorts have popped up on my feed. And I just like hearing like especially when it's like a map that you've made, just hearing kind of like, yeah, this is what I was thinking when I did this area. Or when you're playing like Figglebottom's map or Wanted, and you're just kind of going through the motions of like being somebody who you claim is not very good at zombies, seeing somebody just kind of like figure out a map for the first time and just try to understand mechanics. I think it's really great.
Well, that's it as well. As like coming into playing customs, especially as a map creator, it gives you that window or that door where you can sort of look at it objectively and think about what makes sense. Whereas a casual player, someone who's just going in to zombies in general, doesn't have any idea about what goes into scripting steps and things like that. You're obviously very sort of unaware of what's possible, unless you're well versed in Easter egg quests. Then you're probably gonna have a better idea. But it's like for me, I'm like, I just think objectively as to, okay, what might I do on a map, and what makes sense, because you're hoping that other map creators are of a similar mindset and they're not just sort of throwing things in, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's weird, I find, because I make maps and I try to learn as much as I can, and playing other custom maps, I get to see it in a different light than how I used to. I get to see like the techniques a mapper has done, or if I'm unfamiliar with something, I'm like, well, how in the hell did they do that? It's much more of like a different journey for me now than it used to be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even for me, it's like I was playing through Box Map X. That was I think the first one I played through outside of my own, and it's just like even little things like effects and stuff like that. I'm like, what effects is that, or how do you get the light to do that, or whatever? Because they're things I've seen, but I've tried to replicate, but I just haven't been able to like pull it off. And so, yeah, I think it's obviously a little bit different as well playing older maps, because things might have been readily accessible back then on sites like ModMe and whatnot, which I know it's still there and it's archived and whatnot, but it's different to playing maps that are sort of more recent, because either it's stuff that's accessible now, or it's knowledge that is accessible now through the creator or whoever helped set up the map, which I find really handy, because I can sort of look at who made the map, like, okay, who did that weapon, and I know it's going to be relevant. I know that they're still going to be around doing these sort of things now, as opposed to a map that was out 4 years ago. Like, I don't know if if throwing mold's going to be in the habit of making weapons anymore. Like, so yeah, it makes it good in that sense, because it just gives me that little bit more exposure to potentially new points of contact that can help me out.
Well, as we're closing out, I want to just thank you so much for your time. It has been really great talking to you. I just kind of
My
want
pleasure.
to get a little bit of advice for people who are just starting out mapping. What would you like to tell them to kind of bring them in if maybe, avoid a mistake or something, some lesson that you learned? What is something you would tell a new creator?
So you probably will hear this from a lot of people, especially if you're in the servers. So my first advice would be join the servers for starters, because trying to do it on your own is not, it's not ideal, it's not perfect, and it definitely makes it a lot harder. But my suggestion would be, one, don't start off trying to make the next big thing. Start with something small, make it over and over, and refine that, and just like get really into the habit and trying to making it better every time you come back to it, because ultimately that's what I did with Interment, even though it was unknowingly. The second thing would be is whatever it is that you're making, reference the source material. But if you're just trying to practice and practice your design and everything like that, just get real life references, whether it's making your apartment or your room or your house, or a location on the street or something. Just try and like take photos if you can, obviously, if it's not illegal or something like that. and just try and replicate that, because I often find that just remaking things that I see in real life, it helps me when it comes to sort of recreating a similar space in like a custom map. And like I did that in Alexandria. Like there were lots of components from suburban areas that I drew from real life, and I was like, okay, that's a really cool way to sort of get those finer details, because when you're looking at designing a map, it's hard to get those nitty gritty details and get them done well and make sense. Whereas if you can refer to a real life thing, you're like, okay, well, like no one can contest that, because like that exists in real life, right? So that would be my advice, is just focus on something small for starters, refine it over and over until you get into a really good rhythm of how to detail well and things like that. And then once you've sort of got that down, then sort of expand onto like a larger project and apply what you've learned to that project and make that your first release.
Absolutely fantastic, Brodes. Thank you so much for coming out. It's been such an amazing experience just spending time with you and getting to hear your thoughts and perspectives on the custom zombies. So I just want to thank you for coming out.
Like I said, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking the questions. And I appreciate you sort of going out of your way to not only host me, but to do this entire thing in its own in its own sense, because I think shedding that light on what other people have to say about the modding community, I think it's really insightful for those who choose to listen. And it's obviously very unique. No one's been doing it. It's an alternative to the stream. So yeah, thank you for doing it. I'm looking forward to seeing the first videos or the first posts go up and having a listen to see what other people are thinking of when they go through it.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to see how the Interment remaster turns out. I'm very excited about that.
I'm very excited as well. It's heavy in progress. Still a ways away, but we're getting there.